I was really looking forward to this weekend. After months of being cooped up at home because of the pandemic, I had finally managed to convince my friends Liam and Ethan to go on a little camping trip. We urgently needed some time away from the routine and stress of everyday life. We chose a site a few hours' drive from the city of Exeter in the middle of dense woodland. They said it was a beautiful and peaceful place, perfect for relaxing and enjoying nature. I was excited by the idea, even if I was a little afraid of being alone in the middle of the forest at night. During the trip, we talked a lot about our lives and what we expected from this mini-adventure. Liam was excited about being able to really relax and disconnect from work for a few days. Ethan, on the other hand, was more concerned with taking advantage of the opportunity to take good photos and maybe even post something interesting on social media. I, on the other hand, just wanted to have some quiet time with my friends, without the distractions and demands of everyday life. I was tired of being stuck at home and urgently needed this contact with nature. I felt that this weekend would be exactly what I needed to recharge my batteries. When we finally arrived at the campsite, we were struck by the beauty of the place. It was a clearing surrounded by tall trees, with a crystal clear stream running alongside. We quickly set up our tents and prepared a tasty dinner, excited about the prospect of the next few days. As night fell, we began to hear some strange sounds coming from the forest. At first, it was just the sound of the wind blowing through the leaves, but gradually there were other noises that we couldn't identify. We looked around a little apprehensively, but tried not to pay too much attention. After all, we were in the middle of nature, so it was normal to hear different sounds. We carried on with our activities as normal, preparing dinner and chatting around the campfire. After eating, we decided to take a short walk to explore the area around the campsite. We wanted to get to know the place better and perhaps find some interesting spots to take some photos. After all, we were in the middle of a beautiful forest, so we couldn't pass up the opportunity. Little by little, we moved away from our tents and a little further into the forest. We were still laughing and talking animatedly without worrying too much about the sounds we were hearing. Then, suddenly, we came across a clearing that seemed a little different from the rest of the forest. In this clearing, we noticed some strange symbols drawn on the ground, as if someone had recently performed some kind of ritual or ceremony. We all stood in silence, looking at the scene with a feeling of unease. We didn't understand what it meant, but something inside us told us that we should get out of there as soon as possible. Without saying a word, we started walking back to the camp. I felt my heart beating fast and a strange feeling that we were being watched. I looked around, trying to spot any suspicious movement among the trees, but I couldn't see anything beyond the shadows of the night. When we finally reached our tents, we looked at each other, trying to understand what had just happened. We were silent for a few minutes until Ethan finally spoke up, his voice a little shaky. "Did you see those symbols? I wonder what it all means." Liam also looked tense and worried. "I don't know, but I didn't like it at all. I think we should get out of here as soon as possible." I agreed with them, but at the same time I didn't want to believe that something bad could happen. After all, we had chosen that location precisely because it was remote and quiet. Could something be wrong there? Should we really leave? We spent a long time discussing what to do. Part of me really wanted to get out of there as soon as possible before something terrible happened. But on the other hand, I didn't want to let a little fear and insecurity ruin our dream camping trip. We ended up deciding that we would stay right there, at least for the night. After all, we hadn't seen anything really threatening, and there was no point in running off just because of some strange symbols on the ground. Maybe it was just some ritual of some sect or mystical group that eventually used that place. We went into our tents, trying to calm down and focus on other things. But as the night wore on, the strange sounds in the forest seemed to get more and more intense and disturbing. It wasn't just the wind or the animals, there was something else there. Something we couldn't identify. Every now and then I looked out of the tent window trying to see something in the darkness, but all I could see were the shadows of moving trees. A strange feeling of being watched began to bother me more and more. I looked around, hoping to see some sign of my friends, but they too seemed tense and apprehensive. Suddenly, a different noise caught my attention. It wasn't just the wind or the animals, it was something more disturbing, almost like a distant voice. I stayed silent, trying to pay more attention, and then I heard it again, a kind of whisper, as if someone was calling our names. My heart raced and a shiver ran down my spine. Was there someone or something out there? I looked out of the window again, but saw nothing but shadows. I tried to calm down, thinking that maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks. But the feeling that something was wrong in those woods wouldn't leave me alone. Hesitating, I called out to my friends, asking if they had also heard that strange sound. Liam answered, his voice shaking. Yes, I heard it too, and I have a feeling we're not alone here. Ethan agreed, the concern evident in his tone. I think we should really get out of here. This place doesn't seem safe at all. At that moment, I felt lost and very afraid. Had we made a mistake in coming to camp in that place? What if there really was something supernatural or dangerous lurking in the woods? We didn't know what to do, but one thing was certain. That night was going to be even longer and more terrifying than we had imagined. Lying in my tent, I tried uselessly to fall asleep. The more I closed my eyes, the more strange sounds I seemed to hear coming from the forest. The sound of the wind blowing through the trees, the rustling of leaves, the occasional growl of an animal. All this made me extremely tense and apprehensive. With each new noise, I curled up even tighter in my sleeping bag, afraid that something or someone might be approaching. I nervously looked out of the tent's small window, trying to see something in the darkness, but all I could see were the shadows of moving trees. Gradually, my friends Liam and Ethan became restless too. We could hear them whispering and moving around in their tents, clearly demonstrating that they were as sleepless as I was. None of us could relax and fall asleep peacefully. The feeling that we were being watched didn't leave me alone. I felt as if a pair of invisible eyes were following our every move, even if we couldn't identify the source of that threatening presence. It was a constant anguish, which seemed to intensify as the night progressed. At one point, I thought I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees, on the other side of the clearing. I stayed still, holding my breath and trying to focus all my attention on that point. Then I saw it again, a dark, fuzzy shadow, almost as if it were floating between the trunks. My heart raced and a wave of panic washed over me. Could there be someone or something out there spying on our camp? I squeezed my eyes shut tightly, praying that the disturbing sight was just a figment of my overactive imagination. But when I opened them again, the shadow was still there, moving slowly towards us. Startled, I called out to my friends, whispering for them to be alert. Ethan answered, his voice shaking. I saw something out there too. I wonder what that is. Liam, equally tense, muttered, I don't know, but I have a feeling we're not alone in these woods. I think we should try to get out of here as soon as possible. His suggestion made complete sense to me at that moment. That feeling of being watched and threatened by something unknown was too oppressive. The longer we stayed there, the more exposed we would be to a danger we couldn't even identify. Gathering all my courage, I began to prepare to leave the camp. I hurriedly put on my sneakers, grabbed a flashlight and a small backpack with a few essentials. My friends did the same, and soon we were moving in silence, trying to leave the site as quickly and discreetly as possible. As we moved away from the tents, the feeling that we were being watched became even more intense. I looked around, the flashlight faintly illuminating the darkness of the forest, but I couldn't see anything beyond the trees and shadows. Even so, the impression that something was following us or lurking was overwhelming. We walked cautiously, treading as lightly as possible so as not to make a sound. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and our own hurried footsteps. I could feel my heart beating fast in my chest, fear taking over with every step we took towards the road. Suddenly, a different noise caught our attention. It wasn't the wind or the animals in the forest, it was something more disturbing. A distant murmur, almost as if it were a voice calling our names. We stopped immediately, our bodies frozen with panic. We stood in absolute silence, trying to identify the source of that terrifying sound. Then we heard it again, a kind of whisper that seemed to echo throughout the woods, full of malice and menace. Without a second thought, we started running desperately again, trying to get as far away from the place as possible. Our footsteps echoed through the trees, while the flashlight only partially illuminated the path in front of us. I felt an absurd rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins, fear pushing me to run faster and faster. Suddenly, one of the lantern's lights began to flicker, as if the battery was weakening. I felt a tightness in my chest, terrified at the prospect of being left in total darkness. I didn't dare imagine what might await us if we were at the mercy of that frightening darkness. I concentrated on keeping the flashlight on, preventing the light from going out at all costs. I could already see the road ahead of us, indicating that we were getting closer and closer to safety. But suddenly, a new supernatural manifestation caught our attention. A strange glow began to form in the middle of the trees, a few meters in front of us. It was as if some kind of luminous energy was materializing there, pulsating and gradually expanding. We stopped immediately, paralyzed by fear and disbelief at the surreal scene. The bright light intensified until it took the shape of a humanoid figure. I was stunned, hardly believing my eyes. The entity seemed to float in the air, its contours blurred and indistinct, as if it were made of an ethereal substance. As the creature began to move towards us, a desperate cry escaped my throat. Without thinking twice, I turned around and ran back with all my might, calling out to my friends to do the same. I heard their terrified screams echoing behind me as we ran away from the supernatural presence that seemed to be chasing them. My mind was in a panic, unable to process what I had just witnessed. What the hell was that thing? Where had it come from? And why was it attacking us like that? My heart was pounding as I ran blindly through the darkness of the forest with the sole intention of escaping the nightmare. Finally, we reached the road. Gasping and terrified, we looked at each other, seeking some comfort in each other's company. We knew that something very wrong was happening in those woods, something that defied any rational explanation. What's worse, it seemed that this supernatural entity was still stalking us, ready to attack at any moment. We had no idea what to do. All we wanted to do was get out of there as quickly as possible, but the feeling that something was lurking in the darkness wouldn't leave us alone. We nervously looked around, expecting to see that luminous figure appear again at any moment. It was as if we were trapped in an endless nightmare, with supernatural forces threatening to consume us at any moment. What's worse, we didn't know how to escape the terror that was upon us. All we could do was keep running, desperately hoping to find a safe place to hide. That night had become a real hell. And the worst thing was that, deep down, I had the terrible feeling that this was only the beginning of a terrifying experience that was still far from over. Once we had reached the road, we stopped for a few moments trying to catch our breath. Our hearts were still racing, fear and adrenaline still coursing through our veins. We stared nervously into the darkness of the woods, expecting at any moment to see that luminous, supernatural figure appear again. We couldn't believe what we had witnessed. The sight of that ethereal, menacing creature was still etched in our minds, terrifying us. What the hell was it? Where had it come from? And why did it seem to be chasing us? Gradually our gazes met, sharing the same feeling of panic and despair. None of us knew what to do. All we wanted to do was get out of there, go somewhere safe. But even that didn't seem possible, as the feeling of being watched didn't leave us in peace. So we decided to keep walking along the road, hoping to find somewhere we could take refuge. As we moved away from the woods, I felt a small sense of relief, but I still couldn't shake off the oppressive anguish that overwhelmed me. As the night progressed, the strange phenomena seemed to intensify. Every now and then, we would see objects moving on their own, or lights flashing strangely in the middle of the trees. Each time we witnessed something like this, a shiver ran down my spine and fear took over. At one point, we heard a disturbing noise coming from the woods. It was as if someone or something was approaching, causing the branches and leaves to shake. We stopped immediately, our bodies frozen with terror. Then a terrifying voice echoed through the forest, calling our names in a macabre and threatening tone. We didn't hesitate to take off running again, trying to get as far away as possible from that sinister presence. My legs felt like they weighed tons, but the adrenaline was pushing me to run faster and faster. My friends were right behind me, their screams of terror mixing with the sound of our hurried footsteps. I glanced nervously around, expecting to see that luminous figure appear again at any moment. With every shadow or noise I perceived, my heart raced, afraid that something was going to attack us. It was a feeling of panic and despair that seemed to be eating me up inside. When we finally reached our car, which we had parked near the entrance to the woods, we felt a momentary sense of relief. We quickly got into the car and locked the doors, as if that would protect us from the supernatural threat. However, as we watched the darkness of the woods through the windows, we saw a shadowy figure slowly approaching. It was the same luminous creature we had seen before, but this time its form seemed more defined and threatening. Its penetrating gaze seemed to pierce our souls, causing us indescribable terror. Without a second thought, I turned off the car alarm and hit the gas, wanting to get away from that place as quickly as possible. I could see through the rearview mirror the creature getting closer and closer, as if it was determined to catch up with us. My friends were cowering in their seats, trembling with fear. As we got further away from the woods, the feeling that we were being chased didn't diminish. It was as if this supernatural entity had a connection with us, a kind of bond that drew it closer and closer. We nervously looked behind us, fearing that at any moment it might appear again and attack us. This feeling of being constantly threatened, of not being able to have a single moment of peace and security, was torturous. It seemed that this creature wouldn't leave us alone, no matter where we went. It was there, spying on us, tormenting us, as if it was determined to destroy us. After hours of travel, we finally reached a place that seemed safer and more inhabited. We parked the car in front of a gas station, still in shock from everything we had experienced. As soon as we got out of the vehicle, our gazes met, sharing a mixture of fear, relief, and disbelief. Neither of us could believe what had happened in those woods. It was as if we had witnessed something beyond human comprehension, something that shattered all the laws of reality. All the laws of reality. Still trembling, we hugged each other, seeking comfort and support in each other. We desperately needed to reconnect with reality after that terrifying experience. But even though we were finally in a brighter, busier place, the feeling that we were being watched still didn't leave us. Every now and then, we glanced nervously towards the woods, waiting to see that shadowy, luminous figure appear again. The fear that the creature might find us there and torment us again was overwhelming. We needed to get out of there as quickly as possible before the nightmare repeated itself. So we decided to continue our journey, heading towards the nearest town. As we got into the car, we noticed that the creature seemed to have given up chasing us, or at least we couldn't see it anymore. But even so, anguish and dread still dominated our hearts. The whole way we were silent, each of us absorbed in our own terrified thoughts. We couldn't stop reliving those horrifying moments, trying to understand what had really happened. How could something so supernatural and inexplicable have happened to us? Gradually, daylight spread across the sky, bringing a sense of relief and security. However, despite the clarity, we couldn't shake off the shadow of that frightening event. Every time we closed our eyes, we saw the image of that luminous, menacing creature staring at us. Finally, we reached the city. We stopped in front of a police station, determined to report everything we had experienced. We needed help, someone who could understand what had happened to us and, perhaps, even protect us from that supernatural threat. While we waited to be attended to, we looked anxiously out of the window, afraid that the creature might appear at any moment. The feeling that we were being watched and stalked had not yet left us, even though we were far from the woods. When we finally entered the police station, we could barely articulate words. Our faces were pale, our bodies still trembling. The police officers looked at us with a mixture of disbelief and concern, clearly not knowing how to proceed with such a fantastic and terrifying story. Even so, we struggled to tell them everything from the moment we arrived at the camp to the supernatural persecution we had experienced. We knew our story sounded unbelievable, but we desperately needed help. We couldn't be left alone, at the mercy of that demonic creature. The policemen wrote everything down in their reports, but made it clear that this type of occurrence was completely out of their hands. They said it would be a while before they could take any action, if at all. We felt our hearts sink at this response. We were completely alone, not knowing where to turn. That supernatural entity was still chasing us, threatening to destroy us at any moment. And now, not even the authorities seemed willing to help us. Desperate, we left the police station without knowing what to do. We nervously looked around, waiting to see that luminous figure emerge again. The feeling of being at the mercy of something so powerful and evil was overwhelming. We had nowhere else to run. After leaving the police station, we went back to the car, completely lost and terrified. We didn't know where to go or what to do. The feeling of being at the mercy of that supernatural creature was overwhelming, and the prospect of receiving no help from the authorities made us even more desperate. Sitting in the vehicle, we nervously looked around, afraid that the luminous figure might appear again at any moment. Our bodies were tense and our eyes wide, ready to run as soon as we noticed any suspicious movement. We stood there in silence, trying to gather the strength to decide our next move. But the anguish and dread didn't allow us to think clearly. All we could do was imagine that demonic creature slowly approaching, ready to attack us. Suddenly, a noise coming from the back of the car caught our attention. We turned sharply, our hearts racing, waiting to see the supernatural entity emerge. However, to our surprise, it wasn't the creature, but a shadow moving between the trees, close to where we had parked. We felt a chill run down our spines and a new wave of panic seized us. Had the entity found us? Were we doomed to face that evil presence again? Without a second thought, I started the car and hit the gas, determined to get us away from that terrifying place as quickly as possible. As we got further away, we glanced nervously through the rear-view mirrors, hoping to see the luminous figure following us. But, to our momentary relief, we couldn't spot it. Even so, the feeling that we were being watched and pursued didn't leave us in peace. We drove for hours with no clear direction, just looking for a safe place to hide. But no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't shake the anguish and fear that consumed us. That experience in the woods had left deep scars in our minds, and now we didn't know what to do or where to go. At one point, near a small town, we heard a strange noise coming from the trunk of the car. We stopped immediately with our hearts in our mouths, fearing that the creature had managed to catch up with us. Slowly we approached the trunk, afraid of what we might find. When we finally opened it, we were confronted with a scene that terrified us even more. Inside was a hooded man who seemed to have hidden in our vehicle during our escape from the woods. When he saw us, he quickly stood up, his face covered by a frightening black mask. Without thinking, we backed away in terror, screaming desperately. That hooded figure seemed to emanate a sinister energy, and we had no doubt that it was somehow connected to the supernatural creature that had tormented us. Surely it was a member of that mysterious sect that had performed the ritual in the woods. The hooded man then began to approach us, his voice echoing menacingly. "You shouldn't have interrupted our ritual. Now you will pay the price for your intrusion." Our bodies froze in panic, unable to react. We didn't know what to do or where to run. We were completely at the mercy of that frightening individual, who seemed to have some kind of connection with the creature that had been chasing us. Suddenly, the hooded figure stretched out his hand towards us, and a dark energy began to concentrate in his fingers. In an act of desperation, I shouted to my friends to run, and together we got back into the car, hitting the accelerator hard. As we fled, we looked in the rearview mirror, terrified to see the hooded man raise his hand and release a kind of black, evil energy in our direction. We managed to escape in time, but the scene remained etched in our minds like a nightmare. We didn't know what to do. We were literally in the middle of a supernatural war, pursued by demonic forces that seemed determined to annihilate us. What's worse, we had no one to turn to, as no one seemed to believe our terrifying story. We drove all night, with fear and adrenaline driving us on. We couldn't stop, we couldn't surrender. That supernatural creature and the hooded man seemed determined to hunt us down, to destroy us. With every noise or shadow we saw along the way, our hearts raced, and a new wave of panic seized us. We couldn't relax for a moment, afraid that at any moment those demonic forces might appear and attack us. As the dawn progressed, our bodies began to show signs of exhaustion. But we couldn't stop. We couldn't allow ourselves to even blink. We knew that if we let our guard down, we could be captured by that evil entity. At one point, I saw something glowing in the middle of the trees on the other side of the road. My heart froze, and I immediately hit the gas, afraid that it was the luminous creature chasing us again. I heard the terrified screams of Liam and Ethan beside me as we ran desperately, trying to get away from that place. After hours of non-stop running, we finally reached a larger town where we felt a little safer. We stopped in front of a hotel, eager to find a place to hide and rest. Our bodies were exhausted, but our faces still showed the panic and terror we had experienced. We entered into the hotel, hoping that there we could finally feel protected. But even so, we couldn't shake the unnerving feeling that we were being watched. With every movement, every shadow, our gazes turned nervously, fearful that this supernatural creature might appear at any moment. Locked in our room, we tried to calm down and process everything that had happened. But the memory of that luminous and threatening entity, as well as the hooded man, wouldn't leave us alone. It was as if they had stuck to our souls, chasing us relentlessly. When we finally managed to fall asleep, we were plagued by intense and terrifying nightmares. We relived every moment of that supernatural experience in our minds, with the feeling that those evil forces were still lurking, ready to attack us at any moment. We woke up startled, panic and terror taking hold of us again. We could no longer have a moment's peace, always waiting for something terrible to happen. It was as if that curse had taken hold of us, leaving us at the mercy of forces we couldn't understand or fight. After a terrifying night in the hotel, we decided that we couldn't stand by and wait for the worst. We had to try something, anything, to get rid of the supernatural persecution that was tormenting us. We gathered all our remaining strength and courage and left the room ready to face that demonic creature and the hooded man if they reappeared. We had no idea how we could defeat them, but we knew that hiding would get us nowhere. As we walked through the hotel corridors, our eyes scanned every corner, waiting for any sign of those evil forces. The fear was palpable, our bodies tense and ready to flee at any moment. But this time, we were determined not to surrender without even trying. When we reached the lobby, a shiver ran down our spines. There, in the middle of the reception area, the hooded figure materialized, his sinister presence paralyzing us instantly. Our gazes met, and we could feel the negative, threatening energy emanating from that being. Without thinking, we threw ourselves at it, determined to face it once and for all. Even though we knew of its connection to the supernatural creature, we couldn't just sit back and wait to be annihilated. We had to fight. We had to try to defend ourselves. The confrontation was intense and terrifying. We could feel the evil energy of the hooded man attacking us, a dark force that seemed to suck away our very vitality. But despite the fear and pain, we didn't surrender. We fought with all our might, determined to survive. At one point, we managed to hit the hooded man, who took a few steps back, visibly shaken. This gave us a new lease of life, and we continued to attack him, trying to weaken him enough for us to escape. However, just as we thought we had the advantage, the luminous creature appeared out of nowhere, its imposing and threatening presence paralyzing us instantly. We didn't even have the strength to run, such was the feeling of helplessness that overwhelmed us. We felt our hopes fading as the entity slowly approached. We didn't know how we could escape that desperate situation. We were literally surrounded by supernatural forces that seemed determined to destroy us. It was then that, in a last act of desperation, we managed to pull ourselves together and attack the hooded man again. With all our strength, we hit him once again, causing him to recoil and cry out in pain. That moment of distraction was enough for us to finally run away towards the hotel exit. As we ran desperately, we felt the presence of the luminous creature chasing us. Its footsteps seemed to echo behind us, making us more and more terrified. We didn't dare look back, for fear of seeing that supernatural figure approaching. Finally, we made it out of the hotel and onto the street. Our lungs were burning, our bodies exhausted, but we couldn't stop. We kept running, determined to get as far away from that cursed place as possible. As we looked back, we saw the luminous creature standing at the entrance to the hotel, its glowing eyes watching us with hatred and malice. That image remained etched in our minds, a nightmare that seemed to have no end. We continued running through the city streets, not knowing where to go. All that mattered was getting away from that evil presence that was chasing us. We couldn't stop. We couldn't surrender. We had to survive at any cost. The feeling that we were being watched and followed never left us. It was as if that creature was connected to us in some way, determined to destroy us. We nervously looked around, expecting to see it appear at any moment. As we ran desperately through the streets, we saw some passers-by looking at us strangely. Certainly, our pale faces and terrified expressions were an unusual sight. But it didn't matter, not at that moment. All that mattered was escaping the curse that had fallen on us. We weren't sure how long we had run or where we were going. All we felt was the urgency to get away from that place, to get rid of that evil presence that seemed to be lurking around us. Our bodies begged for rest, but fear wouldn't let us stop. Finally, we arrived at a brightly lit square with lots of people walking around. We felt a momentary relief, believing that we would be safer there. However, the feeling of being watched still didn't leave us. We looked around nervously, fearing that the luminous creature might appear at any moment. Sitting on a bench, we tried to catch our breath and think of a plan. But the anguish and fear didn't allow us to think clearly. All we could do was keep our eyes open, hoping that the supernatural force wouldn't find us again. And so we remained, immersed in a silence that seemed to be broken only by the sounds of the city. But in the back of our minds, the presence of the luminous creature and the hooded man still tormented us, as if they were lurking, ready to attack us at any moment. We didn't know what the future held, or if we would ever be able to free ourselves from the curse.